Hey everyone, Dan here. We are about an hour after market close on Tuesday, June 15th. Today we're going to take an updated look at Square. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. And feel free to comment below with your thoughts, ideas, opinions, questions, tickers that I should cover, or whatever else is on your mind. I look forward to seeing those too. Okay, let's jump right in. So this chart that you see here is actually from the last video that we did, or maybe even a couple of videos ago on Square, which is a few months ago at this point. But I just wanted to sort of, before we delete it and plot a new chart, I wanted to sort of show how you might like use this in your trading. But you see like these areas constantly flip from resistance to supports and then resistance again. That's an area where you might want to look at trimming or stop loss or something like that. And then as things are falling, they constantly get caught in these, sort of zones. And some of these stocks have this kind of cushion of support where there's a ton of zones between, in this case, 236.10 to 218. There's a lot of areas to fall through. So you may just want to pick them as areas for stop loss or for dip buying opportunities on the way up. So if you see something coming up and then it starts to take a breath and it bounces off of that 231 and comes down to the 226, you might say, well, I'm anticipating a bounce there because I know that there should be support at that 226. So buying into that price strength, would have given you still a long leg up to take advantage of. And as you see, it got caught down here at our stop loss area and had a nice bounce off there. And now it's starting to rebuild on these, same price zones. Really, it's getting drawn, getting support, hitting resistance here and coming back to that support zone. So these sometimes can hold up for a very long time, especially with these kind of more established tickers like Square. So I just wanted to show you that, but we are going to blow this up, if you will, and just kind of draft a new course for where Square might be going. So we'll start with kind of a 3-month time frame and sort of like get our bearings and plot some spaces to look for price movement or price activity to happen. Then we'll take a look at the indicators. Then we'll zoom into the 5-day, 5-minute chart and see what's happening on a shorter term time frame if you're looking for maybe intraday trading or short swing positions in Square. So let's start off with just some pretty obvious levels. So previous support, resistance, support, support. These are very strong zones because they encompass both support and resistance previously. So a lot of buying and selling activity that happens in those areas. So I look for that 221 support if it needs it. There is also a gap here, which Square, in my experience, is a pretty frequent gap filler. And so I would look for it to potentially come down, and this might give you a slightly lower dip buying opportunity right around here as it finishes off that gap. But you may want to look at averaging into that starting around that 221 zone because it may not dip much below 220 if it comes down. The other possibility is, if you haven't encountered this before, sometimes when it comes down to fill these gaps because of the selling pressure that entails or that creates in the market, sometimes it does dip down further after filling the gap just because of the momentum that comes into play. If that's the case, I would look for an additional catch zone here right around 215. And then if it needs it, something right around there at 210. That has a lot of support and resistance in the relatively recent history. Other than that, it is potentially forming the beginnings of a channel here. And this won't be as steep of a channel as you see in some of the other stocks because it's a little bit, Square can move quite a bit, but it's, I guess if I had to say that it moves more one way or another, it's a little bit more of a slow and steady than a rocket. Like this is obviously a rocket from like 200 to 278. Like that's nuts. And just a really steep upshots. And it does have some of those, but it also tends to spend a lot of time in these bands of price where it does some longer term consolidation, and then it has those big movements. So right now, I think in the longer look of history, I think this is going to look like basically a big consolidation zone here. So it is forming this slightly upward channel, so that's another place where you could potentially take dip buying opportunities as it comes down toward the bottom of the channel and then ride it up toward the top of the channel for as long as the channel holds. Obviously, all channels break eventually, and so you want to keep that in mind, obviously. Let's see if there's a little bit of a zone here. Yeah, previous support here, recent resistance there, and recent support there. So that could be a good, truly immediate zone to look for it to hold, and then that would clear the way for it to start making its way up around here, 231. And I'm just going to chart it from, over in this space, 238. These would be upper price targets where you could either look to dip buy into the price strength like we talked about a minute ago, or where you could trim, take some profits off the table, close out your position altogether, set yourself a price target and stick to it, that sort of a thing. Or trim just to lock in some profit and then sort of like assess it as it continues to move after that. But these are the upper price targets that I look at for the coming weeks ahead. I mean, it's not going to get up to 270 in a day, so or probably even in days. So I look for that over the course of several days. I want to take a look at the indicators to see where we stand on the longer term chart. Pretty high on the RSI, even with just this push from 210 to like 230. That shot it well into overbought territory. So pulling back a little bit now might give it the opportunity to pull back and fill that gap that we talked about that brings it down to about 220. On the MACD side of things, bearish crossover. So coming down, some bearish momentum coming into play on that one, potentially dragging the price down a little bit. But again, I would strongly look at that small gap right around 220, 221 to see if that's where it's headed. Let's zoom in and look at the shorter time frame for anyone who's playing it on the shorter end of things. Pretty similarly on a bunch of these price targets. So I would leave the price targets there. I would probably just add in this shorter term channel if it can hold it. This one is quite questionable at the moment, to be honest, because it's really just tested this bottom bound for a second time right now, and so you don't know if it's actually going to bounce or not, forming this channel. If it continues to fall, then you could widen the channel out, but the other possibility is that there's just not a channel forming right now. But I often try to jump on the channels pretty quickly because obviously the best time to pick up the channel is sooner rather than later, because eventually they break. So the later in their life cycle that you're getting into them, especially in a short-term time frame like a 5-day chart, the sooner it's going to break on you. And so looking to kind of have the most time with the channel as possible, that's why I look for jumping in and trying to see when they're sort of like in their nascent form. But yeah, I would look for potentially that, but otherwise I would just track those price targets in the other one. We can take a quick look at the short-term indicators on the RSI. Here we're closer to mid-range, so this could bring some shorter-term buying pressure back into the marketplace. I would say this is sort of setting up for potentially coming back down a bit, just because it's dipped into oversold territory here 3 times and then is just about making it up to mid-range every time and then coming back down into oversold. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that again, or I would just keep an eye on for whenever that pattern is going to break. You saw the opposite pattern here, where it was overbought, came down to about mid-range, came back to overbought, down to about mid-range, overbought, mid-range, consolidated a bit, overbought, back down to mid-range, and then it flipped that. So it seems to tend to do this a lot. So just keep an eye on that pattern. Short-term MACD, basically everything relatively flattening out at the moment. Obviously, the counter to this big upswing, recently this big downswing, and now we might have a bit of a consolidation period, maybe a slight sell-off consolidation before its next big move. We don't know if that next big move is up or down, though, of course, but that's what we sort of like keep tracking these things to pay attention to. And that's why we plot plenty of price targets well above and well below. And relatively speaking, this gap is pretty close. That's just a few dollar movement in a stock that's well over $200. So it wouldn't be that crazy of a movement to see it come down. And it wouldn't necessarily mean that like something catastrophic was happening, or wouldn't be potentially perceived by institutions or investors as like a big sell-off. It could just be a small dip and then a big bounce up. All right, well, that will do it for this one. I hope that everyone's trading week is going well and that, I wish you the best of luck if you get into Square. I appreciate you watching and I will see you in the next video.